Former CIA Director John Brennan joins me now. Director, thank you so much for being here. We do appreciate it.
Sure,
do you
Katie.
want to respond to the president?
Well, when the president, Donald Trump, was elected president in November 2016, I was skeptical that he had the qualifications, the temperament, or even the potential to be a strong president. I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. But soon after his election, he started to denigrate the intelligence and law enforcement profession, as well as professionals, as well as their work. And then over the past year and a half, I think he has demonstrated time and time again that he lies to the American people and that he is not fulfilling the responsibilities of the office of the presidency in terms of keeping this country strong and safe. I was hoping he was going to bring this country together after a very contentious election. And so I have been outspoken, and I have taken to the Twitter sphere. And some of my tweets, I will acknowledge, are rather shrill, if not strident. Maybe I'm just an intelligence officer, and I'm trying to ring the bell because I see all the warning signs here, especially when it comes to national security. I worked in national security in the government for close to 35 years, and on issues related to Iran and North Korea and proliferation and Russia. And when I see the types of things that Mr. Trump is doing, yes, I will speak out. I'm hoping to be able to shake quite frankly, some sense into the people around Mr. Trump and those on the Hill. Because the more that they tolerate and they make excuses for his behavior and his performance, the more they're enabling him, the more they're encouraging him to do these types of things. I don't know whether or not he can change his ways or not. I don't know if my tweets are making any difference whatsoever. But I feel it's my personal obligation, and I'm going to stay true to my principles. And the fact that, Mr. Trump calls me a bad person, well, I need to be able to speak openly and clearly about the concerns that I see in terms of the future security and safety of this country.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.